Welcome to the Washington Institute. I'm Rob Satloff, the director of the Institute, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this very special policy forum. Today, we welcome our guest, Benny Gantz. It is a true honor to have Mr. Gantz with us today. There are very few people in Israeli public life who have the record of service and accomplishment that our guest has today. He is certainly known to this audience. He is currently the head of the National Union Party. He has served as defense minister, alternate and deputy prime minister, briefly as the speaker of the parliament. You could almost blink and miss that one. Previously in a long and distinguished career in the Israeli Defense Forces. He rose through the ranks, eventually to become chief of staff after serving as deputy chief of staff, head of Northern Command here in Washington as the defense attaché. A very varied and accomplished career. Now, of course, he is atop Israel's polls, if one takes polls as seriously as some do. We can talk about that later on in our discussion.
As long as we don't drink them.
As long as we don't drink them, as Mr. Perez used to say. But we're really delighted to be able to have Benny Gantz with us today. Just a word of preparation. If you have questions as we go on into our discussion with our guest, please feel free to send them to me, either in the chat function of your Zoom bar. You all know what that means. Or if you are watching us on another platform, please send them to me at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org, and I'll do my best to work them into our conversation. And I say our conversation because I am joined today by David Makovsky, the Institute's Ziegler Distinguished Fellow and Director of our KPAIR program, our Correct Program on Arab-Israel Relations. Delighted to have David with us today to join in this conversation. We are very eager to have a range of Israeli voices to present to our audience, and we could not be happier to have our guest with us today. Benny, you were last with us, I think, when you delivered our Zev Schiff lecture some years ago. I'm delighted to welcome you back.
Yes, thank you very much. It's very good to be here, David and Rob and all the audience. It's really a pleasure to be here today. Actually, I hope that this becomes a kind of interview or a conversation rather than a speech. So just as far as opening, I think that we are currently dealing with 4 or 5 main challenges, I would say. First and foremost would be probably what are the outcomes and the influence of the war in Ukraine. We saw this morning the news about the break of a dam with the massive damage that it created. And the war in Ukraine actually has a global impact as far as economy, as far as bloc stability and posture, I would say. We see NATO is changing, but we also see on the other side some kind of alternative ecosystem developing, mainly between the Russians and the Iranians, and with some support of China as well. So that's an outcome of the war in Ukraine. Of course, the suffering of the people there should not be ignored. Secondly is the Iranian issue. We see them finding some kind of operational route with the Russians, exporting UAVs and all these kind of things, and gaining not just a potential economical path vis-a-vis the sanctions that they are suffering from, but they're also gaining some operational and technological experience with the use of massive drones and UAVs and that type of stuff, which will be eventually very influential on what's happening on the third issue, which is the Middle East itself, and the impact Iran has as a destabilizer for the countries of the Middle East. Definitely we should seek more stability in the Middle East, to include, of course, what's happening between us and the other countries. I hope that we'll hear good news from Saudi. I know that Secretary Blinken is currently either there or on his way there. And I don't know what will come up of it, but definitely if there's an option for us to expand the Abraham Accord concept and have Saudi into this issue, then those will be good news for us all. And last but not least is the internal situation in Israel. We are currently shaping our democratic structure, I would say, making sure that we stay solid democracy, which we should, and I believe we will. So those 5 issues, the war, Iran, the Middle East, hopefully some news from Saudi, ourselves, and if possible to move forward with the Palestinian, which seems like an ever-going story. So I hope we can move with that as well. But we'll take questions and we'll see how it goes.
Terrific. Well, thank you. Let me just begin with a general question, and then we're going to delve into the areas you just outlined. Israel just celebrated 75 years. Over the last couple of months, as Israel was preparing to mark this occasion, it received missiles from Lebanon, from Gaza, even some from Syria. And there was a moment or two of serious violence in Jerusalem. Enormous national accomplishment, serious national security challenge. When you look at this moment, just broadly speaking, a moment of opportunity, a moment of challenge or threat, how do you rank it?
It's a combination. It's. I would like to go back to my office in the Knesset, where I have. It's a very small office with very few items. One of them would be a half-full glass of wine. A picture was taken in my mother's bed in the hospital when she went through a major operation, and the doctor asked her, "What is it?" And she said, "I'm still alive. I'm looking at the half-full part of the glass." So basically, the half-full part of the glass is definitely we are the strongest country in the Middle East. We have achieved a lot. The country grew from 620,000 people at the beginning to close to 10 million people right now. Strongest economy in the region, is in terms of, without taking into consideration Saudi, but strong economy, vibrant society, strongest military force in the region. So we definitely achieved a lot, but the security issues are definitely there. I don't see them disappearing. The other 2 drones I have in my office would be one of 3 soldiers, which talks about the constant need for security in the Middle East. And the other one is of 2 doves with olive branch, one of peace upon us, and the other one for peace between us. So there's always a mixed feeling between what we have achieved, what is still out there and threatening us. So I think that will be in the future as well. It's true that Lebanon is currently presenting the biggest operational threat, I would say, to the state of Israel, mainly with the sense of firearms from Hezbollah. But nevertheless, we still have challenges all over the place. And I guess that we'll have to stay the strongest one in the region, no matter what happens in the future.
Okay,
David?
All right. So I'm going to try to delve into the Iran section of this Zoom session and add my thanks to Rob. Thank you for doing this. And returning to the Washington Institute. Someone who recently spoke at the Washington Institute was the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan. And he talked about the commitment that the U.S. has that it will back Israel's freedom of action in the Iranian context. I was wondering if you saw that as a glass half full moment, or did you think he would say something about America's freedom of action in dealing with Iran? How do you see what Jake Sullivan said?
Well, I think Jake Sullivan is a serious, well-proven friend of the state of Israel and a very good American official, if I may say, from what I've learned about him and from what I know him. However, I think that we must emphasize the Iranian issue as it should be presented, David, and I believe that everyone should understand that Iran is first and foremost a global challenge. Then it is a regional challenge, and only then it's a potential existential threat for the state of Israel. And I'm saying it by the right order according to my perspective. Because if it's just an Israeli issue, go ahead and solve it. But well, it is not. The involvement of Iran in Venezuela, Morocco, South America, African countries, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, is not merely just an Israeli issue. It's a global issue. What they are doing in Ukraine is definitely not an Israeli issue, not even a Middle Eastern issue. So if United States think it needs to act, it should not think to act because of the Israeli perspective, but because of the global perspective and what it does for the global situation, what it does for the United States as a global leader, same sense for the region. As far as for us, of course, we must maintain capacity to operate. I think that without getting into details, we should act at the right last time to act, and as much as possible with coordination with the region and United States, but we should preserve this capacity, and I think that our American friends really understand that.
When you say Israel should act at the last right moment to act, I mean, my reading is to say is not to act too soon. Only everything else has been exhausted. If Israel could take more time to prepare, it would be, some say, look, Iran has got 5 bombs worth at 60% enrichment. It takes 12 days to hit the weapons grade at 90%. And people wonder if that moment is coming up. Some say, no, there's a weaponization program, that's another 2 years. How do you see it? What is, I know you have to be careful in saying publicly as a former defense minister, what are Israel's red lines? But, but can you give us a sense of when, we're not asking operational questions, of course, but conceptually, what is that moment that is a red line, and what are the understandings you feel are needed to be reached with the United States in advance? If Israel is forced to act, even though it doesn't want to, it prefers diplomacy, it prefers the U.S., that others deal with this challenge.
Well, yes. First, I must say that maybe it's not necessary an immediate necessity to operate like, next week or month or so. But I would say it's closer than it was before. And I would like to leave it over there. Secondly, military operation, by and large, and specifically those who have the potential of escalating to a regional war, is an option, but should not be the first option. But when I'm saying it's an option, it has to be a credible option, and this is why we are building our capacity to operate, and this is why we can operate if we need to do so. And thirdly, I think that it should be the interest of all countries to have some level of coordination. There are lots of American assets in the area, other impact aspects that need to be taken in consideration. So, David, it's very hard for me as a former defense minister to speak any clearly than what I've just said, but I would just say it's closer than before. It may be an option. And if there is a solution for it without a war, I will be the first one to be happy.
So maybe I'll ask you from one more angle on that one, and that is there have been reports that that Netanyahu said if you hit 90%, that's a line, or is it more complex? There's more variables to weigh in your mind.
It's the 90% is definitely an issue. because once they go across this enrichment level and they can distribute and put it in different places, you may not be able to stop the enrichment access. There are other aspects of weaponization and delivery system, etc., but that's definitely a serious point. And we need to follow it. But once again, when I'm saying I suggest it won't be just Israel. I suggest the United States to look at it and other countries that need to understand what does it mean for Iran to become a nuclear capable. It will have a deterrence canopy. I don't think that the first thing that they will do is shot a bomb at Israel, but we will see a regional nuclear race. We will see more action on other aspects using this deterrence canopy for the sake of their operations. So I think it's a very negative development, and we should do everything in the capacity to stop it.
One last question, and I'll turn it to my colleague Rob if he has other Iran questions. There's been a lot of reports in the media in Israel and in the U.S. that the U.S. and Iran are engaged in kind of quiet talks, whether it's in Oman or elsewhere. Some call it freeze for freeze. Some call it less for less. When I asked the U.S. official, high-ranking one, said, let's just say we want to de-escalate the situation. Is a freeze for freeze good for Israel as you see it? I mean, we can imagine the pluses and the minuses. It maybe stops this move to 90%. On one hand, on the other hand, if there is a U.S.-Iran understanding, it also means that Israel's ability to act might be also constrained. So how do you see that? Would this be a good development for the Middle East and for Israel if there is a U.S.-Iranian understanding?
I think it's most important to push forward the potential threat of Iran becoming nuclear capable. So all questions of how credible this agreement is, how much can you push it back, how can you verify it? I think that's the main issue. Regardless of that, I think Israel should maintain its capacity to operate under any circumstances. But once again, if something can push away the threat, seriously push away the threat, then something to consider.
Rob, do you have anything?
Benny, when one talks with Arab leaders, with Emiratis, with Saudis, with others, they don't often talk these days in glowing terms about America's presence in the Middle East. They project disappointment that America wasn't there for them after this or that incident, and the sense that America has moved elsewhere. From where you sit and your view of the regional security situation, how do you see the United States and its presence in the region? Israel have been moved from from EUCOM to CENTCOM a few years back, 2 years probably. And the Abraham Accords event, all those two things happened together, and it increased our engagement with the countries around us. Hundreds of security interactions between different leaders and segments of security establishments. So I think I have a fair place to say that I don't think United States has left the Middle East. I think it has lots of assets and influence within the Middle East. I highly recommend, if it's possible, for the United States leadership to give some more strategic attention, I would say, to the Middle East, because the assets are already there. The Fifth Fleet there, Corilla is there, running all over the place, and things are actually happening. So what is missing is, okay, what's the strategic posture? I would say not really what the action or what are the deeds on the ground themselves. And that's why I was privileged to brief President Biden in his visit to Israel. And as much as I welcomed him coming to Israel, I thank him for going to Saudi as well, because I think that's very important from this strategic attention perspective.
I don't know if the research has ever been done on how many Arab students are studying in China. I doubt if there are any princes who study in Shanghai or Beijing, or how many of them are studying in the Western countries. If a study was made and a figure would come up, what I think they would come up with, that would show you that the Arab world around us is really interested in maintaining its relations with the Western world by and large, and with the United States specifically. So I think that what the missing piece would be probably the strategic attention, and I encourage the state to maintain it. And we in Israel, I don't know how much the Israeli knows or the audience know what kibbutz means. But in Israel, we say you may leave the kibbutz, but the kibbutz will never leave you. Same stands for the American. You may leave the Middle East, but the Middle East will never leave you. So I suggest that you won't leave the Middle East and stay engaged, because it will keep bothering you.
Very good. And just for our audience, Benny made reference in his answer to General Eric Kurilla, who is the commander of Central Command. You just said Kurilla, and people may not know who you're referring to. Again, just to remind you, if you have questions for our conversation, please either put them in the chat function of your Zoom bar or send them directly to me at rsatloff@washingtoninstitute.org. Now, you just mentioned both Biden and Blinken going to Saudi Arabia. So let me turn to that for a moment. You were part of the government that helped achieve the Abraham Accords. You have a great appreciation for the opportunities of expanding peace throughout the region. When you look at the world as it is today, with the Saudis hedging their bets, a little with the Chinese, de-escalating with Iran, that sort of thing, I'd appreciate your assessment of what the prospects you think are in the near term to expand the potential relationship with Riyadh.
I hope we'll see good positive developments on this. And Rob, you rightly said, I was very happy to be part of the process that led to Abraham Accord. I think I had two influential steps. First, we prevent annexation, which enabled Abraham Accord to begin with. And then we came to the States and settled all the QME issues as far as the relations between Israel, United States, and whatever is happening in the Middle East. So I think I was part of the enabling peace elements of that, and I'm very proud of it. And I hope that we will see something of that kind with Saudi as well. Israel will definitely benefit from this recognition and from another major pillar in this region. It's the biggest and largest country, of course, very meaningful. I assume the Saudis have some interest as far as security, as far as economical aspects, as far as commercial aspects, as far as energy aspects, and maybe they would come up with some kind of Palestinian token as well, as part of this deal. If it comes, and I hope it will, I will be supportive of it, even from where I'm standing, politically speaking.
And the Saudis have told various Americans, myself included, about their list of items that they hope to gain from the United States from an agreement. Some of this has an impact on Israel. So, for example, one of the items the Saudis hope to achieve is a civilian nuclear agreement with the United States. I know you just referenced your discussions on QME in the past agreements. This would be at a wholly new level. Do you have a view on whether you could conceive of that being an acceptable element of an agreement?
I think we must protect the idea of QME. not just the detail that we've already agreed upon, but also the principle of future needs of QME aspects on all matters. Getting into nuclear energy and that type of stuff, it's very sensitive. I cannot really refer to it without knowing the details that we are talking about. But once again, if we can make sure that QME, the largest perspective of it and the deepest meanings of it can be maintained, then it's a discussable issue, but I need to know the details. Of course, I think that we should be very careful with those kind of issues, but we have to look into the details.
And just for our viewers, if in case you don't know the lingo, QME is qualitative military edge, which refers to
but Rob, you know, today I think we even need to expand it, saying I think Israel needs to keep, United States need to keep Israel not just on the QME, traditionally speaking, as you rightly explained it, but also on the qualitative aspects, how much of whatever is out there, because sometimes qualitative issues become an issue. And secondly, the technology. So it's a qualitative military technology and quantitative edge. This is something wider than what we usually see. And I think it's very important that both United States and Israel continue this discussion. And it's for the benefits of both sides. Let us all remember, I think Israel I'm proudly saying it, that I think Israel has never asked United States to fight for it or to bleed for it. And for us being able to maintain this posture with the United States is to make sure that this QME in the wider perspective of it will be preserved.
important point. Thank you. Just one more sort of regional question, then this will flow back to David's next set of questions. Abraham Accords, huge achievement, important progress, but things appear to have slowed down in terms of the sort of, at least the public aspect of progress between Israel and certain Arab states. Is that a correct observation in your view? Are things slowing down?
Yes and no. I guess that on the strategic level, unfortunately, the Prime Minister didn't visit Abu Dhabi or other places lately. So the official layer is less active. On the high ranking, I would say, on the top, I would say, segments of the countries. But I was talking with friends in Dubai all night, just before coming in. So the people are going there, businesses are happening there, tourists are going there, etc. So the relations continues. I hope to see more on the senior level.
So
David.
Yeah. So Benny, just one more Saudi question. On one hand, what we hear out of Riyadh and is that they have certain high asks from the United States, if it's to upgrade the security relationship with Washington, if it's to restore the weapons flow that was stopped during Yemen, and then you could have this QME question: does that mean F-35s? And then the civilian nuclear energy that we just discussed. But some wonder, look, they are Saudi Arabia. Their peace initiative came out of Saudi Arabia. They are bound to include something on the Palestinian issue. We don't think it'll be their number one issue, but it'll be there. And the joke is, if the Saudis don't insist on it, maybe the United States will insist on it. But so people wonder, can this government, if there is a Palestinian component to a Saudi-Israel breakthrough, can this government do it? And do they need Benny Gantz to get them over the finish line? Because some of the junior coalition partners of Mr. Smotrich and Mr. Ben-Gvir will not have that flexibility. Would you be willing to either join the government for that purpose or do, let's say, what was done in 1978 at the Camp David Accords, where it was the opposition Labor Party that helped Begin basically get Camp David approved? Because it could be that the coalition is not capable of doing it if there is a Palestinian component to this breakthrough.
Yeah. Well, unfortunately, indeed, there are some extreme segments within the Israeli coalition, which I think will end up being a potential obstacle for Netanyahu to move forward with whatever comes up from Saudi. I hope he can manage it within the coalition. I will not join his government. However, I will support any positive action. And I'm telling you up front, I think we must prevent Iran from becoming military and nuclear capable. If the government needs a backup for strategic, responsible way of action, it will get it from me. I think that peace is always a good trend for the state of Israel. And if it needs my backup for that, it will get my backup for that, but I will not get into the government.
And if people said to you, why wouldn't you join the government? They might,
Say again?
if someone asks you, why would you not join the government?
Well, I think that I have to, I cannot ignore what has happened in Israel in the last 3 years, politically speaking. If somebody is, I was very happy to, I think I was, let's put it this way, I was proud of joining the government under the COVID circumstances, maintaining security and ensuring democracy when I was there. But COVID is not there anymore, and I think that I should not join Netanyahu, who betrayed my confidence in terms of current political lives in Israel.
What about the U.S.-Israel relationship? Like it's clear that the president Biden has made clear he's not inviting Netanyahu until there is some genuine compromise on the judicial overhaul question. U.S.-Israel relations has always been based on two pillars: shared values, shared interests. And Israel is seen both as an asset, just like it wouldn't go to a war without an air force or intelligence. It always wants to bring all its assets to the table, so to speak. So, I mean, do you think the U.S.-Israel relationship can be as strong if this question of shared values that was always a given is now not a given? In other words, is the judicial overhaul issue and the U.S.-Israel relationship linked?
Yes, I look at the judicial overhaul issue from an Israeli perspective. I cannot and I will not compromise over the Israeli democracy as I understand it. And it mainly has to do with my rejection to any politicization of the judicial system. We need to understand that there are no separation of power in Israel. You have the political segment and you have the judicial segment, because basically the parliament is totally controlled by the government. So if you weaken the judicial system, you are left with no limits on government. And when government doesn't have limits, slowly and gradually it will shift itself into a less liberal and less democratic country. So we may rise for next morning in Israel, we may rise to another democratic day, but slowly but surely and gradually we may find ourselves escalating into less democratic places. So for me, it's most important to solve this issue from an Israeli perspective per se. Yet, understand that it's definitely influencing our relations with the Western world by and large, and United States specifically. And you rightly mentioned, our relations are based on both values and interests, and interest may change, values should not change. And I think that we are obliged to maintain democracy for ourselves, but it will also help us with the United States.
So look, you've done very well in the polls, and people have seen in you someone in the center of the map who wants to not make sure that God forbid a civil war is won on either side, but that it's never fought, and wanting to keep the country together. And it has been almost a meteoric rise in the polls just in a few months. And I'm just wondering how, people look to you on the Herzog talks and wonder what is Benny Gantz's criteria for success of the talks held under the auspices of President Isaac Herzog. Do you think the worst is behind Israel now? Because you see all these headlines in the newspaper that Likud ministers say, they call the reform is dead, that the overhaul, the big plan is not going to happen. Yeah. And we're not talking about some fine tuning in certain issues. So are you more optimistic that the worst days of division that have characterized the last several months, whatever your perspective, if it's good or if it's not good, the overhaul, do you see the toughest days are already behind Israel, and that you're hopeful that Herzog will succeed? And what would be your criteria for success?
Well, I think if I look in long-term perspectives, then I am optimistic. I think that though we cannot uniformize the opinion in Israel, we will never be uniform. You'll have ultra-Orthodox, you have Arabs, you have right-wing, left-wing, secular, traditional, state of kind of social political tribes, I would say. But nevertheless, I believe that we can unite the country around most of the issues. Now, if you, for sake of conversation, ignore the extremists of all kinds, then the majority of the society will probably agree on 70 or 80% of the issues. So there is a lot that can be done and should be done. And when I look at the Israeli society as it is, and I'm trying to project the future of it, I'm telling you that the Israeli Arabs, to exclude the segment of extremists, wants to belong to the Israeli society. When I look at the ultra-Orthodox society, to exclude extremists, most of them would like to stay ultra-Orthodox, but would like to adapt themselves to the future need of economy, of professionalism, and live their life regularly. Most Israelis who are capable of leaving the country wants to stay in Israel, whether they are right-wing or left-wing, it doesn't important. And we have a tremendous human resources that we can rely on and develop it and continue to build this beautiful country we have. Once again, not uniformizing it, because we will never be the same, we have our arguments, but altogether, if you don't look on identities, but you look on what people are talking about, what people are thinking about, there is much more in common than separate us. So in the long run, I'm optimistic. In the short run, I'm not saying that the difficulties are already behind us. This is why I think that this crisis that we are now going through is a very important one. And the country is struggling over its future, structure and image and character of the country. And this is why the demonstrations are so important, not just because they are blocking the reform, as being said, but they are presenting the public is telling us, the politicians, it's not only our note that's important, but it is also our voice that is important. And I think that this is very, it's a mature process of a society that if indeed we can agree on a vision, on constitutional vision, I believe in the Declaration of Independence. If we can come up with the right reform, the judicial and the administrative processes within the Israeli, And if we can come up with national decency perspective, where everybody gets to serve, but everybody gets to enjoy the resources, then I think we are building a healthy society, I would say. Now, having said that, we still need to solve the current crisis that we are facing. And my criteria would be based on three elements. One, no politicization of the judicial system. A bunch of agreement that we can all live with, how you form basic laws, how you maintain judicial inspection of the government, what would be the right way of doing it, not whether it should be done, but how it should be done. And then, of course, I would say the end of all claims. So we want to agree on something, and 2 months later, you wake up to another someone's dream. So the crisis is not over yet. I have my criteria, I have my principles in the house. I'm telling you without getting into the details. You may think that there are people who would like to have any kind of deal. Just let this noise go down. You may have those who doesn't want any deal and it wants this crisis to continue. And you got me who wants a good deal. And if I can find one, I'll go for it.
Just one last thing, if I could, and then I turn back to Rob. Part of this seems to me psychological, that people are worried with demography at the birth rate of the ultra-Orthodox, that demography is destiny. So let's say the protesters have won 2023, but they ask themselves if they live in Tel Aviv as a secular person, and not just secular, by the way, okay, I won 2023, but the birth rate is such, do I win in 2033? How do you tell people that they could raise a family there, that they, children, grandchildren, that they're not living on borrowed time? Would you have a basic law for legislation that would say you need a supermajority when it comes to the rules of the game? You know, in America, if you're coming to Yankee Stadium to play baseball, and people will laugh because they know I like baseball metaphors. So I apologize to my Israeli friends where baseball isn't a big thing. But if you come to play baseball, the other team isn't playing football. The rules of the game have to be agreed upon. So I'm wondering, in America, if you want to make a constitutional amendment, we know Israel doesn't have a constitution, but it has a basic law, which is, you know, supposed to be a constitution in chapters. Can you tell people, you know, in America, you'd have 37 states have to approve any amendment. It doesn't just mean a majority in the House of Representatives or the Senate. Can you say, listen, you want to change the rules, you need 80, 90 members of Knesset, a super majority. So just cool people off psychologically that Israel is not going to change, you know, for the next many, many decades. That it's agreed rules of the game. It's not a policy difference, it's rules of the game.
I couldn't explain it any way better than you just did.
Even with Yankee Stadium.
Even with the Yankee Stadium. However, what I'm saying is, once again, we must make sure there's no politicization of the judicial system. We have to come to an agreement of how we conduct our basic laws, legislation, etc. And once again, let me give you explain it from the other perspective. Okay, I cannot accept the current situation that you change a basic law by a regular majority or a coincidence of power, you know, like 61 seats. It has to be a serious majority to do that. And I think we can come up with the right solution for that. Whether it's, one would say 72, one would say 71, one would say 70 or 80, it doesn't really matter. I mean, the numbers over there, as long as it's massive majority on 4 sessions or whatever it is, we can come up with some conservative. And, you know, it's very funny because currently in Israel, the liberals are practically conservative. And the conservatives are less liberal now because they're trying to change everything. So we have to be very careful of how we conduct things. So the the legal perspective and the legislation perspective, we should be very careful with how we conduct things into the future. Secondly, but as important, David, I highly recommend to the Israelis who are worried about the future because of ultra-Orthodox to join me I wish they would join me for a visit to Hadassah Academic Center 2 weeks ago in Jerusalem and see for your own eyes how the ultra-Orthodox sector is changing. They are studying, they are working, they want to do more of that. They should do more of that. I don't think that we should live in a country where half of society is serving the other half. That will not work in the future. It's a right Israeli civil demand from all sectors to take part of serving the country this way or another. But as I said before, they too are changing and they want to be part of it. And they understand that not working and living in poverty is not a concept for them as well. So I think it goes back to what should be our national priorities in the state of Israel for the coming decades. So first and foremost would be the education. Secondly would be the development of the country infrastructure to specifically talking to or to emphasize the Galilee and the Negev so we don't lose it. Strengthening our legal system and our governance activity, making sure we have a fair welfare system, and of course, taking care of security. And I intend to insist on those 5 priorities, looking into the future of Israel.
Very good. Well, we have quite a lot of questions that people have been sending in, both on the Zoom chat and to my email. And I'm going to take a few minutes to ask you a few of these questions, Benny. So one of these is about an issue we haven't spent much time at all on, and that's on the Palestinian issue. And one of our questioners asks, you were Minister of Defense, you ran the West Bank. There's now a new Minister of Defense who runs the West Bank.
Two of them are running the West Bank.
Well, so the question now is, how do you evaluate the current government's approach to security and governance in the West Bank, and how would it be any different if you were still in charge of this portfolio?
Yes, I think that Netanyahu have paid prices that he should have not paid. Once again to extremists, and it stands for the Ministry of Defense, where he split some authorities between Minister Gallant and Minister Smotrich. I also had, during my tenure as a defense minister, I had another minister working with me, Michael Bitton, who was responsible for civilian matters, but he was under my control and my policy. He didn't have his own policy. He was working like a practical deputy minister, which later on Alon Schuster did as a deputy minister. Unified channel of command is a very basic issue. And I don't think that Netanyahu should have split it between those 2 people, especially when one of them comes with Messiah-like approach of how things should be done in the West Bank or in Judea and Samaria. So I think it's a big mistake. I don't think it gives us any better security, any better managing of the very complex situation to begin with. That's not the only place where Netanyahu did it. You can see many ministries that it happened the same. The same goes for justice and treasury and other places. So kind of a Fredum Shul, I don't know how you'd say it.
Divide and rule.
Divide and rule all the time. So he really cut these government offices to small, tiny pieces with to feed his colleagues with some kind of political compensation. So I don't think it's doing any. I don't think it's good. The Judea and Samaria issue is a very complicated issue. I think that while we must maintain security all over the place, and once, though I see importance for the settlements, definitely in certain areas, we must make sure that the Palestinian Authority is getting stronger as much as possible, because the weaker it becomes, the less security get, and the more radical get to rise. And unfortunately, I don't see the government dealing with it as it should have.
Okay. Another question asked about the incident at the Egyptian border. armed Egyptian servicemen killing 3 Israeli soldiers. An aberration? Does this reflect something deeper? Is there a problem in security on the border that needs to be addressed? How do you evaluate this?
It's a very sad event that represents the event itself and not a general trend by the Egyptian. When I was chief of defense forces under Netanyahu's policy, we kind of fortified the borders. We created a meaningful obstacle and operational system around it that took down the penetration of the border from several thousands per year to 0 or to single number of people per year. That's a great operational achievement that has a lot of strategic impact on Israel, because we had, that was a ground border between continents. People were walking from Africa to other places through Israel, and we saw what happened. We have good relations with the Egyptian. Unfortunately, once in a while, we see events happening. I don't think it reflects the strategic situation, but it reflects the fact that there are terrorists in Sinai. Some of them find themselves within the security forces, and it's a very unfortunate event, but I don't think it reflects the relations between our countries. And by the way, there are lots of criminal aspects over there, of drugs, traffic, etc., etc. So sometimes it has an impact on it. So it's a peace border, but it's not a quiet border.
So one of our viewers heard your remarks about CENTCOM and Arab-Israel relations under CENTCOM, and asks, where can this go? Is it possible to imagine a regional security framework, a common missile defense, even perhaps a Middle East NATO? What should we dream for when we think about Arab-Israel security cooperation?
First, we need to dream. That's the beginning of any vision. And once we'll have a vision, we can transfer it to goal and objectives and things of that type, and maybe things will become reality. We can definitely look into a more cooperative security structure. I don't know if it can go all the way up to Middle East NATO type of stuff, or kind of, but yes, some coordination, some capacity being shared. All countries we share many interests. The Emirates were attacked, the Saudis were attacked by Iranians, we were attacked by the Iranians, we are all suffering from terror activities. So is there a room for cooperation? Definitely. What kind of official structure? It's more hard to portray it right now, but therefore the CENTCOM organization and activity is so important, because it's like an organizational enabler, I would say, to bypass the political difficulties of creating something official.
A question about Turkey and its re-elected President Erdogan. Do you expect the newly empowered Erdogan to be the old Erdogan, who was very sour on the Turkish-Israeli relationship, or the old Erdogan who kept alive the Turkish-Israeli relationship for the benefit of both parties?
Yes, I had this privileged opportunity to meet with Erdogan a few months ago. What I sense that he wants to improve the relations between Israel and Turkey. I think he wants it for internal reasons. I think he wants it for regional reasons. I think he wants it for maybe for America and NATO or other interests. But as long as he wants to move forward, I'll be very satisfied with. We had good relation. I had good relations with Minister Akar and Erdogan as well, who respected me in this meeting. Israel offered help and actually helped Turkey in the last earthquake that they went through, terrible earthquake. We can facilitate stability in the Eastern Mediterranean between us, Cyprus, Turkey, and Greece, which is also very important. So there are lots of interest for us to cooperate, and I hope that we'll see some cooperation of that kind.
And just before we close, I have to ask you this political question that someone posed to me, which I think makes a lot of sense. You're now atop the Israeli polls. You weren't atop of the Israeli polls before, but now you are. How does that change things for you? What new opportunities, what new influence, what new voice, and what new political path does this open for Benny Gantz?
I don't think I've changed in the last 4 years. I may gain some political capabilities, but basically, the very same guy who seeks the best for his country, for all the segment of the Israeli society, that seek unity while understanding that there's no uniformity, that reject extremism, and I'm practicing on the very central path of the Israeli political, ideological system. I'm very traditional, secular traditional, but I respect liberalism, etc. So I think the country is coming to a new understanding. I stay the same. They are the one who changed and realized that I may give them an option, who is more, I would say, normal. And people seek normality. It's not a wrong thing to have. Pure normality, take care of the country, don't deal with yourself so much. I hope to gain more political power in order to be able to create a unity government in the future that really represents most of the Israeli segments in it, reject extremism, and lead Israel into a more stable future as well.
Benny Gantz, thank you very much for joining us
very much.
here at the Washington
Thank
Institute.
you very much.
Delighted to have you.
Thank you very much.
And that concludes our policy forum today. You can find more about Israeli politics, the peace process, and all the issues that we discussed at the Washington Institute website, www.washingtoninstitute.org. Thank you for joining us here at the Washington Institute.